Hello, my name's Paul Stam, practiced law here in Apex for almost 50 years. This is only my first time at Thales teaching a class beginning in January. Today we're going to discuss international trade, tariffs. It's very prevalent in the discussion today, so I hopefully after you have heard today's discussion, you will understand what you read in the news better, and you'll be able to puncture a lot of holes in a lot of what people say about it, because a lot of what is said about it is ignorant and uninformed, but not everything. This is a pencil. Now suppose you were on a wonderful island in the middle of the South Pacific, but it was uninhabited except for you. You were stranded in an episode of Lost. The movie, Lost. But you had some paper and you sort of want to write down your experience so that when you franchise your experiences for another movie, you'll remember what happened. And you said, I wish I had a pencil. How would you make a pencil? I'm not asking that to you. You might have to cut down a tree first. You might have to have an axe to do that. Where are you going to get an axe? Then where are you going to get the graphite for that? Hopefully there's somewhere on the island where you can mine some graphite. And after a while, you'll come to the conclusion that of all the things you can do, you can catch fish, you can enjoy the bananas growing right above your head, but you can't make a pencil. One book I saw is entitled I, a Pencil. I, a Pencil. And it explains that there might be 19 different inputs into this pencil. For you to make a pencil might take you your entire life, but we can get them for a few cents. And that is an example of specialization. And specialization is what makes the world turn and make people more wealthy. Let's just take an example of a family, husband, wife, obviously 2.1 children, and the wife is really good at keeping the books, writing checks, applying for mortgages, but she's no good at fixing cars. They each have separate jobs, but this is around the house. So by specializing, they make their lives happier. Make their lives happier. Many of you are involved in sports. If you're the only person in the world, you could run, you could swim, you could do isometric exercises to keep from waking anyone else up. But you can't play basketball by yourself, can you? No. So people specialize in different things, and that makes the world a lot more interesting. In England, let's go ahead and put the first page of this up. This is from and I'm going to get out of the way. This is from a college economics book that I picked up for about $3 at a used bookstore. It's about 40 years old, and it has the basics of this. It hasn't changed in the last 40 years, and it hadn't changed in the 40 years before that. Economics is a science. They're always learning new things, but the science of economics is now well known. Perhaps you've heard of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and that comes from a very significant date in our history. Anyone know what date that is? He wrote the same year as the Declaration of Independence and the first North Carolina Constitution in 1776. At that time, Adam Smith, and this will be on their canvas, is that what it's called? So you can look at it. I'm not expecting you to understand or even listen to most of this, just some of the underlying things, and I'll be pointing them out. But Adam Smith wrote a book, Wealth of Nations, and he proved theoretically that nations are wealthier if they trade with each other. Before that time, England had very high tariffs and other barriers to trade. We'll talk about those in a minute. After that time, and after the writing of a similar book by David Ricardo, England became one of the freest traders in the world, having virtually no tariffs, going from very high tariffs and other, you see the repeal of the corn laws there? There was practically a famine in England because of the corn laws. The corn growers didn't like it that corn could come from other countries, so they put up laws against it, and Adam Smith and others proved that that made the whole world hungrier and poorer. And one of the main reasons for this is because if you specialize, then you can do the things where you're most productive, and other people can do things that they are most productive. Now, the second thing I would like to, some countries have absolute advantages to other countries. Perhaps your older brother thinks he's better than you at everything, okay? Or your older sister. But it's not absolute advantage that counts. It's what we call comparative advantage. Let me just give you a couple of examples of comparative advantage. My father went to college before he entered high school. Now, that's impossible, right? To be in high school, you had to be at least a certain age. I think it was like 14. And he graduated from grammar school a year early, so he was too early to go to the high school. So he went to a business college and graduated from a business college where he learned typing, stenography, bookkeeping, that kind of thing. Okay. He was a really good typist. I'm very slow. I can, on a word processor, I can do about 20 words a minute with many mistakes, and they're corrected by whoever knows who corrects it. But he could do 95 words a minute with no mistakes. So he and I went to law school at the same time. He graduated. He already had a PhD in chemistry, but he went to law school. And I went by his law office one day, and I saw him on the typewriter. And this was right before electric typewriters that would just spit out whatever you wanted, or you know what I mean, word process it. And he was typing away on a wheel. Over on the side was his secretary doing nothing because he was typing it up. And I said, "Dad, why? Why are you doing this?" He said, "Well, I can type it faster and with fewer mistakes." And I explained to him the law of comparative advantage, that let's just use some figures that might have been true 30 years ago. You're paying your secretary $15 an hour. You can charge your clients $200 an hour. Wouldn't it be better if you let her type and you could talk to clients? That's comparative advantage. I'll give you another example, and I think we will go to page. Okay, the page numbers are at the top. I'm going to take that apart. 778 on the left. And I'm not reading everything that's circled, but this is when one country has an absolute advantage over the other in a commodity, the gains from trade are clear. But what if America can produce both wheat and cloth more efficiently than England? In other words, we have an absolute advantage against England in growing wheat and making textiles. And this was David Ricardo's book a few years after Adam Smith, about 160 years ago, 40 years ago. The theory of comparative advantage that is still accepted by economists as a valid statement of the potential gains from trade, even though America might be 10 times as efficient as than England, it is still possible to increase world production of both wheat and cloth by having America produce more wheat and less cloth. Even though we have an absolute advantage of it, we don't have a comparative advantage. And then England produced more cloth. Does that make sense? Can you be thinking at appropriate time, if you can think of a comparative advantage, let me know. I'll give you one right now. What is America's almost biggest export that you can touch and feel? We'll talk about other things later. All right. It's not done very much in Apex anymore, but it starts with an F and rhymes with harm. Farming. We have huge I also taught fourth grade, and that was how I got people to answer. Okay. We have huge surpluses in food, agriculture products. Not little vegetable things that can be perish, but soybeans, pork. North Carolina, I believe, is the second biggest pork producer in the nation, and we export a lot of pork to China. China is just as big as America, but guess what they don't have? A lot of China is deserts and mountains, and their farmland tends to be in small plots, of 5 acres here, and maybe you got to go up the road for another 2 acres. And so they are very inefficient in production of food commodities. So if they stop buying farm commodities from us, where are they going to get it? Well, Brazil grows soybeans just like the U.S. does, and so they can get it from Brazil just as well as they can get it from here. Okay. On the other hand, what does China have a comparative advantage on, do you think? They have lots of people, lots of smart people. Chinese have just as high an IQ as Americans do. They were held down by political mismanagement, but they're very smart, and there are a lot of them. So your iPhones, where do you think your iPhones are made? China, mostly. About 90% of them, I think, are made in China, because they have people who can put those screws in them and do it. And you can buy them for $1,000, but if we had to make them ourselves, that iPhone would cost you $3,000. So they have comparative advantages in many things, and we have comparative advantage against the world in other things. Okay. Anybody think of another comparative advantage question? Let me ask you this. Have any of y'all ever seen a Brazilian movie? A Brazilian movie? There are a lot of them. One of my uncles has a PhD in Brazilian film and teaches Brazilian film at New York University. How about, any of y'all ever seen what do they call it, Bollywood, a film made in India? We have? Okay. One. Okay, they make more films than the U.S. But guess what China's latest threat is? They're not going to let us send any more movies to China. And we have a huge surplus in movies, right? All around the world, people watch American movies much more than they watch film. And frankly, a lot of the European films are a lot better than American films, but they're not as entertaining. They make you think too much. Okay, how about Bollywood films? What are they like? Aren't they like, I've heard they're sort of like soap operas, what we used to call soap operas. They have a lot of song? Okay, all right. So So in the other capitals of film, there's other capitals around the world, but we have a huge surplus in that. Okay, so we understand the concept of comparative advantage. If one country does something real well, comparative to somebody else, they have to trade for something else that they may have a comparative advantage. All right, for example, are you drinking coffee or just water? Coffee. Now, it's possible to grow coffee in America. You could grow it, I guess, in a greenhouse and produce it, but what would the price of coffee be if we tried to grow coffee in America? A lot higher, right? But then you have countries like Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras. I mean, they grow better coffee and cost less. They have a comparative advantage in climate. The same thing is true about one of my least favorite foods is avocados. How many of y'all like avocados? All right, good. I hear they're very nutritious. A superfood. I just don't like them. But do you know where they're all grown? Mexico, right. So if we have a trade war with Mexico, the price of avocados is going to skyrocket. Okay, so that's the comparative advantage of soil and climate. Or you take a country that there are just a very few countries that grow chocolate, or whatever the bean is that makes chocolate. Anybody know where chocolate is grown?
Belgium.
Well, what'd you say?
I know Belgium has really good chocolate.
Yes, but they don't grow it. The place with the biggest, most chocolate is in West Africa. There may be places in South America as well, but there's a couple countries in, I don't know if it's Benin or Togo or Cote d'Ivoire, but that's pretty much all they grow. And so they trade that, and they have a trade surplus in whatever you call chocolate beans. And the reason why the price of chocolate is going up so high recently is because they have not a famine, but some disease that hit all the chocolate bars. Not the chocolate bars, the chocolate plants. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's go through a little more of this textbook. Let's go to page let's go to page 779 for just a second. Yeah, here we go. This is a summary. The gains from specialization and trade depend on the pattern of comparative, not absolute advantage. Okay. Then let's look at, and by the way, you could buy an economics book and you could learn it, study it. If you have a little math with it, that's good, because economics is a lot of math. And geography. If you know a little math, a little geography, you can handle economics. Okay, let's now go to page 781. And this makes one point that I've already made together. Economies of scale. There's some places, well, let's just take avocados. There's probably a way you could import the good soil for avocados and the good climate, and do it in a greenhouse in America, and then do it in a greenhouse or the opposite of a greenhouse that makes things colder, in a refrigerator or something, in every country in the world. And you could grow avocados everywhere. But you would not have the comparative advantage that Mexico has. Everybody understand that concept? Okay. Let's then go to, so trade allows small countries, and not just small in size, small in economics, to specialize and produce a few commodities at high enough levels of output to reap economies of scale. You ever heard of Lesotho? Lesotho. It's inside South Africa. It's a separate country, but inside it's totally surrounded by South Africa, and it's reported to be one of the poorest countries in the entire world. So they import a lot of stuff from us, and much of which was paid for through foreign aid. But the only thing they export are some diamonds. They do have diamonds, okay? But they have a big trade deficit with the U.S. And we're going to talk about trade deficits in a minute. The president has put on his list of extra tariffs to put the highest tariffs on his chart against Lesotho. And I don't know why. I think it's just because it had so little trade that the math worked out that way. But that raises the other question of, does people say that trade should balance? Okay, if you're selling $1,000 worth of goods to this country, then they should be selling $1,000 worth of goods to this country. And that's not how it works at all. Let me just give you an example. The only shopping I do is at the grocery store. I'm allergic to shopping. Okay? Other people in my family do that because of comparative advantage. But I do shop at the grocery store. I am always paying the grocery store money, and they give me the goods. I'm importing goods, and I'm paying them money. I have a huge trade deficit with Harris Teeter. Does that mean that Harris Teeter is a bad person? No. It means we have a trade deficit because they're selling something I want, and I'm paying for it. What matters is more than just goods, but also services. All right, what is a service? We talked about Hollywood films. We have a big trade surplus in the service of films. What is something else that you think we might have a big surplus in? That we provide to the rest of the world and they pay us for. Well, how about not the phones themselves, but I think the 7 biggest companies in the entire world are American technology businesses, like Meta, Apple, and I'm one who doesn't really know the difference between those. Y'all probably do. But technology, we're huge exporter of services for which they pay us money through ticket prices for films, through license fees for other things, royalties, that kind of thing. Pardon? Did somebody else have another? I thought I heard one. What about legal services? Yes, we have a huge surplus in that. There are American legal firms that have offices all around the world, and they brag about it. We're in 5 continents. Has anybody ever seen in North Carolina, have you ever seen a law firm that's centered in that's owned by another country? I never have. I mean, there may be some, but we have a huge surplus. What about insurance? Now, England has a huge surplus in insurance. You ever heard of Lloyd's of London? It reinsures risk all over the world. And reinsures just means takes the risk from other insurance companies and sort of joins in the risk, and they're paid money for doing that. But America has a big surplus in insurance. So we have surpluses in services. We have deficits in goods. But does that apply each country this way? How many of y'all took world history? World history, okay. What was the triangle trade? Anybody remember the triangle trade? Okay, I'll refresh your memory because I know you studied this. During the colonial period, and this was when Africa was being exploited colonially, and they would send cheap manufactured goods to Africa because they really liked, those beads and hatchets and things like that. And what got exported from Africa to primarily Brazil, but also the Caribbean and somewhat to America? Yes, sir.
Slaves.
What?
Slaves.
He said slaves. Yes, that was one of the triangular parts of the triangular trade. And what then went back from the Caribbean and South America and a little bit of America, U.S., to England? What can you do with all that product of slave labor that they want in England? Yes, sir.
No, sometimes they exported weapons back to Africa.
Exported what?
Weapons?
To Africa?
Mm-hmm.
No, I was talking about, I'm sure there was some of that, but I was talking about from the Americas back to England. Yes, sir.
Textiles?
No, because at that time they didn't have a textile industry here. That came later. That's a little later. Yes, ma'am. Cotton, and because that's a commodity that grew very well in the Americas. And yes, sir.
What about sugar?
Okay, sugar cane. What do you make out of sugar cane that you can transport economically? Rum.
Yeah. I was about to
Okay,
say that.
so a lot of that triangular trade was rum for manufacturers for slaves. Okay, and there was a balance of trade, but there wasn't a balance between any two countries. You see what I'm saying? All right, in addition to services, there's a third way in which a country that has a overall deficit in trade pays for it. Have you ever heard, and you might want to write this down, FDI, foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment. I don't know if there's 1 million people in North Carolina who work for a foreign company in North Carolina, but there's several 100,000 at least. So when a Japanese company says, we want to build a new facility in North Carolina, and we'll mostly hire North Carolina workers, and we're going to spend it. We're going to buy the land from American landowners. We're going to pay the cost of building it, and it's going to cost, let's use an example. VinFast. Have you heard of VinFast? All right, tell me what VinFast is. All right, say it again.
Car company.
It's a car company owned by a company in what country?
Oh gosh. I can't remember.
Starts with a V.
V.
Vietnam. The richest guy in Vietnam owns VinFast, and they are building batteries. There's probably 500 acres just over the line in Chatham and Lee County if you go down US 1. And they're getting huge subsidies from the state of North Carolina because they're promising to spend all this money and populate it with mostly North Carolina workers. And they're coming here because our workers are so well trained, and also we have predictable laws, and entrepreneurs like to go to countries where the laws are predictable. They're not predictable in Vietnam. Okay, so who went down to the groundbreaking when these hundreds of acres and this bill? I don't remember exactly, but it's like they're going to spend $5 billion. That's a lot of money. Just down the road, about 30 miles, maybe 25 miles away. And guess who went to the groundbreaking? Did people from Vietnam come over and have a big party? No. All the politicians from North Carolina, the governor, all the cabinet, the state senators and state representatives came and said what a great thing it was for North Carolina to have Vietnam money coming to America. That's called foreign direct investment. And you can't get a politician to say that's a bad thing. But that money offsets a deficit in, you have to count that up in the things that are coming from that country. If you're going to count the money that they're making by selling us stuff, you also have to count the money we get back from them in licensing fees and other services and the foreign direct investment. And it pretty closely balances. Not totally. Not totally. Okay. But it doesn't completely balance. And what happens if a country constantly has a trade in everything in foreign direct investment, but it's always in the negative? Anybody want to hypothesize what happens? Do they go bankrupt? No, there's no bankruptcy of countries. Yes, sir.
Do they go into debt?
Well, yeah, they can finance it by debt, but the debt has to come from somewhere, and they like the people who get to pay lend the money. They like to be paid back with interest. So I don't really count that as one of the things, because the debt is also on the balance sheet. Anybody want to try? Okay. How many of y'all have traveled internationally to a country that did not use the U.S. dollar?
Oh, I just did that.
Where did you go?
I went to England and France.
England and France. How about you? England? Others? What?
England and France.
England and France. Yes, sir.
New Zealand and Australia.
New Zealand, Australia. Yes.
Mexico and Central America.
Yes. What country is Central America?
Oh gosh. It was a little while ago, so I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but we visited a few islands off the coast.
Okay. I've been to Costa Rica a few times, including for when I was in third grade. That's a foreign trade example, because my cousin, they traded me for my cousin for third grade. I went to be with all the boys, and she came to be with my older sister. Okay, foreign trade. So what do you notice? Whenever you go to another country, you have to do, if you're going to spend any money, you have to do currency exchange, right? And when you're doing it, you have no idea what you're getting, but the person you get, they have published, the dollar will buy $1.30 of Canadian money. The euro is a little bit more expensive than the dollar, so if you have $100, you might get 90 euros. Mexico have the peso. Is that right? Do you remember how much it was for the other? Okay. And currency can be manipulated, by the government. So I'm going to tell you how sometimes it does work, but this is not how it's supposed to work. Okay. About 42 years ago, I went to Chile. Anybody ever been there? Okay. It was right during the time when a Marxist had been elected president of Chile. Elected. Probably the only actual election that ever elected an actual communist in the world. Salvador Allende. Well, he was assassinated later, right after we left. And while we were there were a lot of shootings. It was not a peaceful time. But anyway, they had a law that you had to change money when you came in, and you had to change enough for how long you were staying by the day. I don't remember the exact amount, but say you had to change $100 per day, and if you were going to stay 2 weeks, which we did, then you would have to change $1,400 of American money for a certain number of, I don't even remember what the currency was. But then, when you left, and we didn't have many expenses, okay? you changed it back at a much worse rate. So suppose I'd spent none of it, I paid $1,400 in, I would get 1,000 back. Rip off, yes. Yeah, and a lot of countries do that, but not free countries. Free countries, they let the currency rate exchange just according to what the market is, okay? Well, what happens if your country is perpetually in debt on the trade deficit plus foreign direct investment? Your currency weakens against every other currency. You see what I'm saying? In other words, it becomes, let's say the U.S., well, let's not use U.S., let's use, well, we'll use U.S. Sometimes you plan a trip to England, and they say it'll cost you, well, England's very expensive, right? Yep. All right, let's say your trip, your expenses over there are going to be $2,000. But the English pound weakens against the American. So now the travel agent calls you and says, hey, it's not going to be $2,000, it's only going to be $1,500. Don't you want to come? Right? So it balances out primarily by change in the value of your currency. Now, as of today, the American dollar is the reserve currency of the entire world. There's only a few countries that don't use it as their reserve, like Russia, and Russia isn't going to do it anymore because 300 billion of their money got seized when they invaded Ukraine. Yes?
Isn't oil also bought in US dollars?
Yeah, historically and generally, oil is bought in US dollars. That's how it's quoted, and so they have to change money to buy it. Yes, that's correct. Although, if the US dollar is no longer the reserve currency of the world, there's a group of nations called the BRIC nations that are talking about using something else as a reserve currency. Okay? The BRICS is like Russia, Brazil, South Africa, a couple of others. And they don't like it that the U.S., and one reason they might not like it is because these reserves, most of them are kept in bank vaults in either London or New York. So when Russia invaded Ukraine and that money was sequestered and said, you can't get access. Now, we're not taking it away from you, but you can't get it, okay, because you might use it for nefarious purposes. So to avoid that happening to the US dollar, you have to do as little as possible of these sanctions that keep people from getting their own money. When I say their own money, I'll just give you an example. You remember about 3 years ago when the US sent Iran several billions of dollars that we've been holding for a decade. Anybody remember that? And everybody said, why are we giving money to Iran? Well, it was Iran's money. They were just holding it in the in New York banks and London banks. You see what I'm saying? So that's a problem if your currency becomes so deteriorate, the security for it is deteriorated through sanctions, then people might start saying, well, we're just not going to use that. Instead, we're going to use diamonds or whatever, or gold, actual gold. And another way it happens, in addition to, the other way that things balance, is in addition to one currency becoming stronger against another or weaker, is, let's take in the New York banks, they may have a vault in the down in the basement where they have $1 billion worth of gold bars that has a sign on the door. This belongs to France, okay? And they have another smaller room. These gold bars belong to Algeria, all right? And If Algeria is not balancing things up and France is overbalancing, then they'll just take some of those gold bars and move it from this room to that room. So that's how things balance over time. One reason you want the dollar to be used as reserve currency all over the world is, guess what? For every, and it's usually $100 bills they use. They don't use 20s for this, but guess who has lots of $100 bills? And if they're keeping that in bill form, guess what? We're not having to pay interest. We're not having to borrow that $100 at interest. We just have it out there. Who likes to deal in $100 bills? Certainly y'all seen enough shows to understand this. Drug traffickers, people who launder money, casinos, the people who are trying to hide their money. Most of it is hidden in foreign countries in $100 bills that they can convert into cash anytime they want, and sometimes they don't care if they got 100% on the dollar. They'll if somebody will launder it for them, they'll take 80% on the dollar. Okay. Any questions so far? Yes, ma'am.
Would you say the comparative advantage is like needed in every type of trade?
The question is whether comparative advantage is used in every type of trade. I would say almost always. Not 100%, but 99%. Any other question? Okay, in addition to high tariffs, there are other barriers to free trade. But first, let's understand what a tariff is. A tariff is a tax put on an import. It is not a tax put on another country, and it's not a tax that you see. Now, when you go to the store and you buy an iPhone, you'll get a receipt from AT&T or whatever, and it'll show a sales tax on that iPhone. You see it, you know you're paying it. And if you're at all smart, you know who you're paying it to, and you're paying it to the town of Apex and Wake County. So you know where it's going. And the sales tax is about a third of the county or city's budget. Okay. But in economic terms, a tariff is a tax on consumers. The consumer doesn't write the check, doesn't put it on the credit card and see it as a tax, but it's embedded in the price of the product because an importer cannot absorb a tariff. I've seen studies that they either pass through 90% of the tariff or 99% or even 105%, and they blame it on tariffs, okay? But it's a tax on you. But you don't know that because it's not transparent. One of the principles of good taxation is that it be transparent so you know who you're paying to what. All right, so that's what a tariff is. It is not a charge on another country. So if China has to pay if there's a 150% tariff on something from China, and people even want to buy it at that price, that will not be a liability of the nation of China or any of its people or their citizens. It's paid for by the person who buys the product. Excuse me. But there are other ways that yes, sir.
And so about the tariffs, how it's not paid for by the country, but if the price goes up in our country, less people are going to buy it. So wouldn't the country then exporting that product take a hit because not as many people are buying it?
If there's not the question was for the video, wouldn't it reduce the income of the nation from which it's coming if it raises the price? And the answer is, well, sort of, maybe so. Here's the problem. There's two purposes always talked about tariffs. One is we're going to protect American workers, steel workers, whatever. And the other is to raise money. Well, these are opposing proposals, because if it works to protect workers, it doesn't raise any money. If it raises these trillions of dollars in money, it hasn't protected anybody. And in the case of, let's take China, in the case of, well, I was going to use the case of soybeans, because if they don't buy our soybeans, they're just going to buy them from Brazil. You see? So it's not two countries against each other. It's every country against the world, but the whole world is wealthier the more free trade you have. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay, for now. All right. Okay, what other barriers are there to free trade? Well, there can just be a straight out embargo that says we will not sell to such and such a country. And when Russia invaded Afghanistan, y'all don't remember that, before you were born, right? It was also the year the Olympics were going to be in, do you remember, Zach? Okay, well, the U.S. and several countries just said, well, we're not participating in the Olympics if Moscow is invading Afghanistan. So that's an absolute embargo. It's not a matter of a tariff. It's saying, or take illegal guns, you know. You have to get an export license to sell guns to people in other countries, and if they're adversaries of ours, you can't get a license. So that's a barrier to free trade. And it's not just used for Olympics, but sometimes it's used for wheat and corn and whatever. So that's a second type of barrier. Let's go to case for free trade. All right, here we go. Just raise it up a little bit there, Zach. Okay, methods of, what I want to get at is methods of protectionism. All right. They may place a tax on imported commodities, and that's a tariff. But what are the other things? The country may impose an import quota. That's not a tariff. That says, and this was done a lot with cars in Japan, that kind of thing, 40 years ago. Okay, Japan, you're sending too many cars to the U.S. They're too good. We can't compete. So you can send 1 million cars, and the million and first car can't come in. That's another barrier to free trade. And a little problem with that, of course, it has the same effect of a tariff, because that just, by limiting the quantity, it raises the price to the consumer. Okay. Another thing you can do, the country may adopt domestic policies that reduce its demand for the imported commodity. For example, it may require potential importers to obtain a special license or restrict the ability of its citizens to use their funds to purchase the foreign exchange needed to pay for it. So, for example, if Europe is mostly legal marijuana, okay, but at the federal level it's illegal in the U.S., and at the state level it's illegal in North Carolina. So they can just by law say you can't have something whether you pay for it or not, and that's a barrier to free trade. So you may have a policy reason to do that. Okay, let's go down a little bit here. There are two kinds of tariffs. One is a specific tariff. Okay, we'll have a $1,000 tariff on every imported phone. Or it can be, we'll have a tariff on 20% of the value of every imported phone. And that's called ad valorem, which means that it's based on the value. Okay? All right, let's go to the next page. Go up a little bit. A little more. Yep, here we go. Wait a minute. No, that way. We want to get under this. All right, keep going to the bottom. All right. Okay. The protective function of a tariff conflicts with the revenue function because a tariff will not yield much revenue if it is actually effective in reducing imports. In other words, if the tariff on China is now 150%, almost nobody's going to buy anything of export and import from China. So it's not going to raise any money. You see, you can't do both. It can't protect you and raise a lot of money. It's often in prices, and you're going to be studying microeconomics, right? A lot of times you can make more money by lowering your price to something that 10 times more people will pay than raising the price that cuts your clientele by 50%. Everybody understand that concept? Okay. So those are two conflicting, opposite goals of a tariff. Okay. Could you go to the next page, 788, about halfway down? Here we go. Objectives other than maximizing output. These are some reasons you might rationally want to have tariffs, okay? So what I'm explaining is not that every tariff is bad, just most of them, okay? So you may have a concern with a policy objective other than maximizing income. And here are some examples. Suppose that they're only growing chocolate beans. The government might decide, however, that there's a distinct social advantage to having a more diverse economy. So you're not at such risk based on the weather or disease or whatnot. So because citizens would have a wider range of occupations. And that would more than compensate for reduction in living standards by, say, 5%, which might, the tariff might reduce their living standards 5%, but it makes less likely that it would be reduced to nothing in time of drought or disease or famine, okay? All right, let's go to, all right, the bottom of that page. Another risk is that technological advances may render its basic product obsolete. The quartz crystal badly damaged the Swiss watch industry in this way. Between 1974 and 1979, Switzerland's share of the world market in watches dropped from 40% to 30%. 30,000 jobs were lost. So that's why sometimes countries want to protect something from technological advancement. Okay, but what do you think that does worldwide in the long run? What was it? The buggies, horse and buggy. They were protected for a long time because we got to have horses and buggies. But any of y'all ever ridden a horse and buggy? I had a pony and a pony cart in my high school days, and I used it to take dates out in the countryside. But I don't recommend that either for dating or for horses. Okay. All right. Okay, go to 790 at the bottom. Start at the bottom. What page is that? What? 790. Okay, down at the bottom here. All right, I want to start here, and then you'll have to go back up to the top of the column. Another reason is to protect against predatory actions by foreign producers. Tariffs may be used to prevent foreign, and then if you go to the top of this, industries from gaining an unfair advantage over domestic industries by use of predatory practices that will harm domestic industry. So what is a predatory practice? For example, this is true. All my stories are true. Some maybe somewhat embellished. My daughter spent a total of about a year and a half in China at different times. And one time she was there for 6 months. She was studying at the Chapel Hill's Peace, War, and Defense program. So she had to learn Chinese. Well, she brought back a recording of The Gladiator when it just came out. Have y'all seen The Gladiator? Do you remember how it ends? How does it end? All right. Anyway, you got to go to the end to really enjoy the movie, right? Well, if you hadn't seen it, you got to go to the end. Well, anyway, she brought back this recording, and she said, "Dad, I only paid $1 for this." I said, "Let's see it." It was filmed by somebody at the back of the theater, videoing the screen, okay? Completely illegal. Probably illegal for her to have bought it. But guess what? It cut off 2 minutes from the end. So China is very bad at protecting intellectual property. And that's a predatory action, as we spend a lot of money inventing technology, and China just has lots of spies that do nothing else but spy on American research firms to get an advantage. So that is a reason to take protectionism. Another form is dumping. And this is a trade practice that is condemned by the World Trade Organization. And what that is you have a lot of stuff. Well, let me give you an example that you... Okay, Apex has a lot of gas stations, but when I first came here, it had about 2. So if a company came in and bought one of those gas stations and then said, "We're going to reduce our price by 20% until we get that other guy out of town," he has to fold up and go away. That's called dumping. In other words, you use your resources to get rid of your competition. And that's what China does a lot, is they don't just dump on us, they dump on other countries as well, because they're really good at manufacturing. Okay. So, how much protectionism? What this textbook says, there's a strong case for allowing free trade in order to realize the gains from trades, but there are also reasons for departing from completely free trade. And then it gives some examples. I've already mentioned one. It would be possible to grow coffee beans in American greenhouses and to synthesize all the oil we require in our factories, as Germany did during Second World War, but that would make the world poorer. Okay. All right, now, next chapter, the gains from trade. Let's go to page 792. All right. When I was teaching this in February to Leanne Fulton's class, they were just about to do a debate against another school on free trade. Who won the debate, I don't know. But I armed them with fallacies in arguing about free trade. And there are fallacious free trade arguments. In other words, do you know what a fallacy is?
Yes.
It just doesn't make sense. It's illogical. If you know the facts, it's illogical. Okay. And there's a couple of fallacious free trade arguments. One is that it always benefits all countries. No. It benefits most countries most of the time, but it's not always everybody for everything. Infant industries never abandon tariff protection. One of the reasons for a tariff that makes some sense is that you've just started an industry and you need to protect it till it gets big enough to survive. And so people will say, well, that never happens. They never grow up. Well, that's not true. Let's go to the next page. 193. Fallacious protectionist arguments. And there are a lot more fallacies on the protectionist side. Let's look at them individually. The exploitation doctrine. One trading partner must always reap a gain at the other's expense. And that's just not true. Have you heard anybody say all these European countries, these 100 countries for the last 80 years have been plundering, ripping us off, pillaging, and raping us? Have you heard anybody say that?
I've heard like probably ripping.
Yeah, he says ripping us off a lot, but then he's also said they plunder, rape, and pillage, just like Vikings. And they've been doing it for 80 years. So if you stop back and you think, well, if that's true, then why are we the richest country in the world? Not the highest per capita income, but why are we the richest country in the world if we've been ripped off for the last 80 years by the whole world? So it doesn't even make sense, okay? But the fallacy is this. The fallacy is, because of comparative advantage, it is possible for both parties to gain from trade and thus refute the exploitation doctrine of trade. Okay? You can read more about that later. Keep the money at home. Buy American. We had a governor about 12 years ago who did an executive order trying to say that the government of North Carolina had to buy products from North Carolina. Right? They couldn't get the best price in Virginia or Nevada or wherever. They had to buy it home. And it sounded good, but it made no sense. And I had in my district that I was representing at the time, John Deere. Y'all know what John Deere makes?
Tractors.
Tractors, yeah, and big farm equipment. And they had a big manufacturing facility in Fuquay-Varina, or near Fuquay-Varina. But they were headquartered in Illinois. So according to this decree that she put out, Governor Bev Perdue, North Carolina could not buy a tractor from John Deere because its headquarters was in Illinois. On the other hand, let's say you had a landscaping company that you wanted to hire to do some work for the highway department, and they were headquartered in North Carolina, but all their employees were over the line in Virginia, in Danville. Well, you could buy them. You see what I'm saying? In other words, it just doesn't make sense. The same principle of free trade that's true in international affairs applies within states. Zachary, did y'all study the U.S. Constitution much this year? Yes or no? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you think of any provision of the U.S. Constitution that addresses this question of free trade within the states? Do you happen to have a copy with you?
They should all have a copy.
Okay, we're going to have a little test here. The first one to find it, step up and you'll get a prize.
What prize?
What?
What prize? Give a step over prize.
Gamblers are always thinking about money, but what about the honor of it all? Find the provision in the U.S. Constitution that was not there under the Articles of Confederation and was one of the main reasons for adopting the Constitution. You don't know? Oh, you didn't take the class. Okay.
Well, we took it, but
You took it, but you didn't remember it.
I took this class last semester.
All right.
Just hear them.
I'm
I'm here from another class.
I got it. All right, it's not at the beginning.
Come on, volunteer.
And that Constitution is not that long.
It's a really small text.
What?
It's pretty small text.
But it's only like one sentence.
Remember what branch has the purse?
It might be in Article 2. Is it? Is it Article 2?
Depends on like what clause you're thinking.
Yeah, what clause? What clause? Not what article, but is it in Article 2? Yes, sir.
Article 1, Section 9 talks about the migration or importation of such a person.
No, that's slavery. Not that. Well, actually, you'll get half a first prize because that actually does do deal with international trade in slaves. Okay, that's not what I'm thinking of.
Is it Article 1, Section 10?
Someone suggests Article 1, Section 10, which says what?
It says, no state shall, without the consent of the Congress, lay any imposts or duties on imports or exports except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws, and the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by any state on imports or exports shall be for the use of the Treasury of the United States, and all of such laws shall be subject to the revision and control of the Congress.
All right. You get a copy of my card,
Oh, thank
and
you.
if you'll email me, I will send you an intellectual prize.
Oh, nice.
All right? Okay. So that keep the money at home argument just doesn't fly, because we will get more money at home if we freely trade with Virginia and Detroit than if we don't. Just doesn't fly. But a lot of people think it does. You know, maybe they got laid off from a factory and they see an import coming in made by some factory somewhere else. We should have kept this at home, but they don't see the bigger picture. All right. Protection against, here we go, against low-wage foreign labor. Well, that used to be a really big argument that, you know, they've been able to make it so cheaper in China. And then China got too expensive, so they moved it to Thailand and Vietnam and Bangladesh. And the result is textiles, making, you know, t-shirts and shoes and all that kind of thing. The result is you get to buy products a lot cheaper, and therefore you're more well off net. Okay, the next one is on the next page. Well, all right, this is not circled, but go down, whoops, no, more that way. Up. Okay, in the long run, trade cannot hurt a country by causing it to import without exporting. All trade must be, and it says two directions. We can buy only if we can also sell, but it doesn't mean that we have to sell to the same person or country from whom we're buying. That would be impossible. If you were on an island and there were two of you, you could trade with only one other person. But in the real world, you're trading with the whole world at once. And there's no requirement, and it would not even be a good thing if you tried to equalize it on a country-by-country basis. It's worldwide. Goods plus goods minus services minus foreign direct investment will equal out over time, and if they don't, the value of the money changes, or the gold bars get moved from one country's vault to another. Is that clear? Okay. All right, let's go to page. Oh, by the way, they said there's another example of a protectionist thing that might be good sometimes, and that is for national defense. You just might say you may not sell to Russia at all at any price the details of our new supersonic or hypersonic weapon. And if you give them their nuclear secrets, like Rosenthal, the two Rosenthals did in the early 50s, we might even execute you for it. Okay? And that's a barrier to free trade, but it makes a lot of sense. Okay. Okay, are we on page 795? Yep, here we go. Let's start at the top left. A fallacy, which means illogical, if you know the facts. Protectionism creates domestic jobs and reduces unemployment. Does it make sense? So suppose that tariffs or import quotas cut the imports of Japanese cars, Korean textiles, Italian shoes, and French wine. This will create more employment for Detroit auto workers, Georgia textile workers, California farm workers. But the answer is it will initially, but they can buy from America only if they earn American dollars. So it's only a temporary fix that is self-defeating. The likely long-term effect is that overall unemployment will not be reduced but merely redistributed amongst industries. Back in the 70s, the textile industries in North Carolina were hollering for protectionism because they were being, textiles were being made cheaper in India and other places. My father was a victim of that, but not a bad victim. He was the head of research for Burlington Industries, which was the largest textile company in the world at that time. And they decided they just had to stop doing research. Remember, technology is very valuable. Stop doing research and, to keep alive. So he had to lay off about 25 PhDs that were working for him. And, that type of that industry died. And so as a result of that, he went back to law school and we graduated together. So it wasn't a total disaster for him. But since then, the North Carolina textile industry has revived by doing specialty textiles. That is not just the easy kind of looms, that kind of thing, but there's a lot more value added by the method of doing, especially with non-woven fabrics. And in Apex, we have the headquarters of Cotton Inc., which, am I allowed to give another personal example of technology in textiles? My father had his degree was in chemistry and he worked in textiles all his life. And he had one of his associates, Dr. Juliana Tesoro, and their group invented two things that were of great benefit to the women of the world, whether they realized it or not. Number one, they invented no iron cotton. You know what I mean? Put a little something on it, and you don't have to iron it every day. Saved a lot of labor, right? Which at that time was mostly performed by women, ironing, Now they probably have automatic irons that you just put in the washing machine and it comes out already ironed. I'm kidding. I don't think that happens. But the other thing that he and Dr. Tesoro invented, had a patent on, was stretch panties. You want to know what that is? Before that, if you had cotton panties, they didn't stretch. Okay, that's technology doing value that increased our national income and the income of the world. Okay, all right. Subsidizing, here we go, right here. Another fallacy is that subsidizing exports increases employment. Not true. And the state of North Carolina does a lot of subsidizing. The former governor was always talking how terrible it was to reduce the tax on wealthy corporations because the corporate income tax was going down to zero. But yet, he was giving away huge targeted tax breaks to Apple, VinFast, Wolfspeed. In other words, the targeted taxes to specific companies were more than he was arguing should be kept on all companies. So, and that's a way to subsidize exports to increase employment. It makes no sense, but a lot of people are fooled by it. Okay, I think we only have 5 minutes, so final word. Yeah, that's all. Okay, we have 5 minutes for questions, and I once taught law at Campbell Law School 42 4 years ago. And if you don't ask me a question, I'm going to ask you to stand up and answer my question. So I'll let you think for about a minute. And if you have a question, you don't have to stand up. You don't have to say your name. Yes, sir. I saw you raising your hand. No, you were just doing this. All right, while you're thinking for 1 minute, true story. My wife had a part-time job when I was in law school, and she would often come by the law school and just sit in on a class till I was ready to go. I usually hitchhiked, but sometimes she would give me a ride home. And in those days, it was sort of freewheeling back in the 70s. You could bring dogs to class. You could wear blue jeans. It was just very hip, okay? So there she was minding her own business, and the professor on administrative law said, "Now, lady in the back row, I have a question for you. Please stand up." And she said, "I'm not a lawyer." He said, "Well, stand up in any way and answer this question." Okay, so your question, please. Yes, ma'am.
My question was, why does free trade benefit all countries?
The question is, why does free trade benefit all countries?
Doesn't free trade benefit all countries?
Pardon?
Why does it
Why doesn't it benefit all countries? Okay, well, it benefits most countries usually, but the reason it doesn't always is, number one, it could be a political dictatorship that doesn't allow free trade. Number two, it could be a country that is subject to climate and soil problems that limit them to doing only one thing, and if the price of that craters, they got a problem. So those would be two reasons why they may not benefit from free trade. Yes, ma'am.
If some of the reasons for tariffs are considered unconstitutional, why would you say current administrators might be inclined to impose tariffs?
Okay, I didn't hear the last part of it.
Why would you say current administrators would be inclined to have tariffs on that?
Oh, but you said so, if it's not constitutional?
To keep your money at home.
Okay. Why are they doing it? Some of them did real great at Wharton School of Business in how to make money, but they skipped the course on economics. Stupidity. Economic stupidity. Yes, sir.
So does that explain, because current administration with the tariffs that he put on all these different countries and in the stock market, but like now that he's stopped all the tariffs, everything's kind of gone back almost to normal.
Well, it hadn't gone back to normal.
Well, like it's gotten
Yeah.
better.
Choo. Okay. And your question was?
Well, I guess kind of what you said with the economics and just economic stupidity, was that just kind of
Okay, well, the real problem, the huge problem will be if they ever go into effect. They're not really in effect now. So some of them are not in effect. So that's the real reason. And what is the stock market? It's not, nobody decrees, I'll come right to you. Nobody decrees what the stock market has to look like. The stock market is just millions of people every day giving their opinion about what the worth of the business in the countries are, okay? So that's what it's reflected. Yes, sir.
I was gonna.
Wait, an uncertainty. Stock market does not like uncertainty. Business owners need to know what are the tax laws going to be next year, not tomorrow. Have time for one last question, and we'll wrap up in about 60 seconds.
Okay, so you say that the tariffs imposed by the administration are born from stupidity, and that they're just bad for the overall economy and the wealth of the world. Yet a lot of these nations in Europe and across the world have had tariffs on us for a long period of time, and a lot of these tariffs are actually like responsive in matching those tariffs. So isn't that part of the balance, though?
The question is, haven't other countries been having higher tariffs and we're just trying to match them? No, these are called reciprocal tariffs, and there's nothing reciprocal about them. articles on this, they used the wrong equation, just the wrong equation. Our exports, their exports for that particular country, not worldwide, minus half, and that's the tariff we're going to put on them. But the true equation is our imports minus our surpluses in services, minus foreign direct investments, and then with one country it might be like this, another country like this, like this. Worldwide, it's like that. In other words, it would be like Indiana in 1897 tried to define the value for pi. Y'all know what pi is? As 3.2. They said it would be simpler, but it's the wrong answer. And if you have the wrong equation, you get the wrong answer. King Canute went down to the shores of the English Channel on the northern bank, sat in his throne, and commanded the tides not to wash over his feet. It didn't work. If you use the wrong equation, you'll get the wrong answer. And basically, another economist said, well, taking his own statistics, it would be 1/4 as high as he calculated because he just calculated wrong. Okay, thanks for listening. And you send me an email, I'll send you something just for you. Okay? All right.